Welcome to the Deep Dive. This is where we take on some of the most complex administrative rulebooks, and today we're back with the Manual of Patent Examining Procedure and really just pull out the vital intelligence for you.
We are, yeah. We're continuing our journey through the MPEP, and specifically we're in Chapter 2300. This is the chapter that covers all the contested cases, interferences and derivation proceedings.
High-stakes stuff.
Exactly. Situations where more than one person is claiming they invented the same thing.
And our mission today is to drill down into one specific section, MPPP Section 2307, titled Action During an Interference. And this is, well, it's a critical procedural pivot for any patent professional because it lays out the entire institutional response.
It really does.
I mean, the transfer of authority, the suspension of normal work, and how they maintain fairness the moment a conflict is visually on the books.
It's all about defining the operational boundaries. You have two or more parties fighting over the same invention, and MPP 2307 just draws a very clear line. It says who is in control.
And that's the Patent Trial and Appeal Board, the PTAB.
Right. The PTAB takes over. And the Patent Examining Corps, well, they're forced to take a step back. It's the USPTO's way of making sure a fair, almost judicial process takes over from the normal day-to-day administrative flow.
Okay, let's unpack this. And I think we have to start with the biggest change, which is that immediate transfer of power. The second that interference is declared, jurisdiction over that patent or application file, it passes exclusively to the board. And this isn't like a partial handoff. It's a total black and white shift.
That is the critical takeaway. Once the board starts that contested case, it's like a procedural firewall goes up. Any other proceedings that were happening for that file inside the office, they just stop. They're immediately suspended.
So it's like the examiner's told, pencils down on this one.
That's a great way to put it.
So if an examiner was, I don't know, about to issue a notice of allowance, or maybe responding to an appeal brief on a completely different set of claims in that same file, all that work just grinds to a halt.
It does.
But what if stopping it causes unnecessary delays?
The rules are, well, they're absolute. The examiner cannot take any independent substantive action on that file without explicit written authorization from the board.
So the integrity of the contested case trumps everything else.
It has to. The risk of one party getting some kind of advantage or having a claim allowed while the basic priority question is still being fought over, it's just too high.
But the examiner is the one who really gets the technology, right? They're the technical expert on the prior art and all the details. Does the board, which is mostly a legal body, ever lean on that expertise?
Oh, absolutely. But the distinction is so important here. The board might consult an examiner on a purely technical question.
Like what?
Maybe to interpret a complex diagram or help find some specific non-patent literature. But that's just a technical consultation. It is not a transfer of decision-making authority.
So they're a resource, not a decision maker.
Exactly. All the substantive steps, all the rulings on motions, evidence, all of that stays firmly and exclusively with the board.
That makes sense. The legal calls stay with the judges.
Yeah.
The technical input is just advisory. Now, for the applicant, they're probably wondering, when does this procedural nightmare actually end? How long does the board keep this ironclad control?
It stays in force until the entire interference proceeding is completely finished. And that doesn't just mean when the PTT issues its first decision.
So it goes beyond that.
It does. The board's jurisdiction only ends after two things happen. First, a final judgment has to be issued. And second, any judicial review, so any appeal to the federal circuit or another legal challenge,
Right.
that has to be either completely finished or the legal window for even filing that review has to be fully expired. It ensures true finality.
That time lag between the board's decision and when the appeal rights expire, that feels like a detail a lot of people might miss. It really underlines that the whole judicial process has to play out before the administrative side can even think about picking it back up.
Precisely.
Okay, let's shift gears from institutional control to institutional integrity. When you have two highly motivated parties fighting over something potentially worth millions, maybe hundreds of millions of dollars, the rules have to be incredibly rigid to make sure it's fair.
This is really the cornerstone of any adversarial proceeding.
And MPP 2307 puts a huge emphasis on transparency.
It does, by reinforcing the absolute ban on ex parte communications. And that's just a fancy term for any private or one-sided conversation with a board staff member, including the administrative patent judges themselves.
It seems like common sense, legally speaking. You don't talk to the judge without the other side there. But what does that really look like in practice? Why is it so strictly enforced here in the MPP?
It's enforced so strictly because the entire credibility of this whole system relies on the appearance of being neutral. Interferences are, by their nature, competitive. They're designed to pick one winner. So every single communication, every piece of evidence, every procedural move by one side must allow for the other side to participate or at least observe. There are just no back channels, period.
Okay, give me a high-stakes example. What if someone tries a subtle workaround? Say an applicant's lawyer runs into an administrative patent judge at a conference, and they just mention, how technically complex their case is. Is that considered ex parte?
If it touches on the substance of the ongoing case, 100%, yes, the rule is broad. But, even more dangerous is if a party tries to use an examiner as an intermediary.
Using someone who is office staff but not on the board to pass along a message.
Exactly. To try and influence the board's decision. That is an explicit violation, and this section of the MPP requires that any attempt like that has to be reported to the board immediately by whoever received it.
And the consequences for that are, well, they're much bigger than just losing the interference, aren't they?
Oh, much bigger. The board can impose severe sanctions on the party. They can even refer the patent practitioner involved to the Office of Enrollment and Discipline.
And that could lead to losing your license to practice before the USPTO.
It could. The penalty is designed to protect the integrity of the whole system.
That's a critical point for practitioners to remember. Okay, the next integrity issue here is file access. If you're fighting over an invention, you need to see the other side's documents, but you don't want them on a fishing expedition through your whole portfolio. How does the rule manage that?
It creates a very specific, very narrow path for access that's governed by the rules for contested cases. The parties in the interference can access office records that are directly related to that case.
So what does directly related mean here?
It means the application file of an involved patent, or maybe an application where a party is getting the benefit of a priority claim based on the contested invention.
So it's very targeted. You don't just get to browse their entire filing history, only the specific documents that are relevant to the claims being fought over.
Exactly right. This is not blanket discovery. This kind of access requires you to precisely identify what you need, and there are often fee requirements. It's a very formal process.
And I assume this special access for the parties doesn't change anything for the general public's right to access records.
Correct. It's important to note the special access for interference parties does not override or affect the public's normal access rights under the broader USPTO rules.
Okay, let's talk about administrative strategy. The USPTO knows that a long, drawn-out interference can just stop related patent protection in its tracks. And that brings us to MPP Section 2307.03, which talks about applications that are related but not actually part of the interference.
Right.
And for an applicant, this is a huge deal because any suspension can mean losing years of patent term adjustment.
This is the procedural tightrope walk. You have to balance the board's need for control with the practical reality of the administrative clock. So if an examiner has a related application on their desk, maybe a divisional application with some common subject matter, the examination can proceed, but they can't act alone.
So who steps in to coordinate things?
That's where the interference practice specialist, the IPS, comes in. The IPS is an expert inside the USPTO on these procedural complexities. The examiner has to consult with the IPS.
To make sure nothing they do messes with the interference.
Exactly. To ensure that whatever they're doing doesn't conflict with or maybe even prejudge the issues that are currently before the board.
That's a really critical oversight role. What kind of analysis does the IPS do? How do they decide if a case can move forward or if it has to be put on ice?
Their main question is about foresight. They ask, are the claims in this related case likely to be legally barred if the applicant ends up losing the main interference? Because of something like collateral estoppel.
Okay, and if the answer is yes?
If that risk is high, the IPS will almost certainly advise the examiner to suspend the examination.
And suspension, like we said, hurts the applicant because it stops that patent term adjustment clock. Is there any kind of compromise the system offers to soften that blow?
There is. And this is where the MPP authorizes a really pragmatic fix. To reduce that potential loss of patent term, the examiner can issue a restriction requirement.
A restriction requirement. Now, usually that's used to make an applicant split different inventions into separate applications. How does it work here?
It's used almost like a surgical tool. The examiner uses the restriction to limit the prosecution in the active application to only the claims that are non-interfering.
The ones that are clearly outside the scope of the fight.
Precisely. The claims that are clean and could be patentable right now. Then the specific claims that do overlap with the contested subject matter get spun off into a new divisional application. And only that divisional application gets suspended while waiting for the interference outcome.
That's pretty smart. So the system lets the applicant keep moving forward with the clean claims, which means they're still accruing patent term adjustment on that part of their portfolio while only freezing the contested part.
It's the systemic compromise. It preserves both administrative efficiency and the applicant's rights at the same time.
It's a mechanism for keeping things moving.
It is. And on top of that, the examiner has a duty to stay aware of the bigger picture. MPEP 2307 also talks about expansion. If an examiner, while looking at a related file, finds other patents or applications out there claiming the same invention that aren't yet in the fight,
They have to flag it.
they have to prepare a formal referral. And that referral goes through the IPS to suggest expanding the interference, potentially pulling a whole new party into the contest. It demands constant institutional vigilance.
We've established that the board is the ultimate authority here. It governs everyone, the parties, the examiners. Does the board's power ever reach back into those related but not involved applications?
Yes, it can. The board has the administrative authority to order certain papers to be filed in those related applications.
Why would they do that? What's the purpose?
It's usually for official notification. Let's say one of the parties in the interference makes a key admission about prior art during a deposition, and that prior art is super relevant to the related application. The board will order that admission to be formally added to the related file. It makes sure that the examiner, whenever they do resume prosecution, is fully aware of all the legally relevant facts that came to light during the conflict.
That's a vital feedback loop. The results of the legal fight directly inform the administrative review. It protects the integrity of whatever patent eventually gets granted.
That's the goal.
Now, we've talked a lot about the mechanics around the interference, but does MPP 2307 actually get into the weeds of the trial itself? You know, the motions, the discovery, the hearings?
No, it actually makes a point of saying it doesn't. It acknowledges that those direct actions, the real nuts and bolts of the contest, are governed by entirely separate, detailed rules.
So this section is really about the administrative wrapper, not the trial content.
Exactly. The trial procedures are handled under different parts of the Code of Federal Regulations, and those complex tactical details are just outside the scope of this particular MPEP section.
So if you're a practitioner and you need to dive into the tactical strategy for an interference, where should you be looking besides the MPP?
First and foremost, you have to go to the Byrd's Contested Case Practice Guide. That gives you the operational framework. But even more important, you must follow the standing orders that are entered in your specific interference case.
Ah, so those are case-specific directives.
Yes, very case-specific. They often address unique issues of timing or complexity in that particular fight, and they lay out the precise rules for conduct and submissions. For a practitioner, following the standing orders is absolutely non-negotiable.
So that's the key distinction. MPP for the big picture, practice guide for general strategy, and the standing orders for the exact tactical plan.
You got it.
So to recap, we have dissected MPP Section 2307. We've charted that immediate and exclusive transfer of power to the board, the very strict rules against ex parte communication that are needed to keep things fair, and these pretty sophisticated administrative strategies.
Like using the interference practice specialist and those targeted restriction requirements?
Right, all to manage the clock on related applications. That a special thank you is in order for Mike Shepard, the creative director who organized this entire audio series.
This section really shows the huge institutional effort it takes to pivot from a standard administrative review to what is basically a high-stakes court case, all while trying to protect an applicant's rights and keep the system efficient.
So let's turn to the big picture. What does all of this really mean? The procedure laid out in MPP Section 2307, it just reveals this delicate institutional tension that you find in any high-stakes contested case. On one hand, you've got the USPTO aiming for administrative efficiency, authorizing strategies like restriction requirements and IPS consultations to manage the clock and try to mitigate patent term loss.
And on the other hand,
the section demands absolute procedural integrity. It enforces these strict rules against ex parte contact and very limited file access.
So consider which of those two things, institutional efficiency with the patent term clock, or absolute adversarial parity enforced by those rigid procedural rules, which one presents the greater challenge for the USPTO to maintain in a high-stakes competition over who owns a piece of intellectual property. The rules say they value both, but in practice, they are very often in direct conflict.
And we do have our required notice. This summary was generated using AI tools, may contain errors or omissions, and is provided for general educational and informational purposes only. It is not legal advice or a substitute for formal instruction. For authoritative guidance, you should consult the official MPEP, a qualified instructor, or registered patent practitioner.
We really appreciate you joining us for this deep dive into the procedural mandates of contested patent cases. We hope this has given you the foundational knowledge you need to navigate this very complex legal terrain.